everyone, I'm Siri Vincent Pluff.
And I'm Cassandra Snow.
And you are listening to Chaos and Cunning,
a DIY witchcraft podcast at the crossroads of magic and daily living.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to Chaos and Cunning. We are so thrilled to have you. I'm Siri Vincent Pluff, and my co-host is Cassandra Snow. And this is actually the last episode of our first ever season. So, we're very thrilled to be wrapping things up. We'll actually be talking about seasonal magic later in the episode because it felt like a really good point in the podcast to do that. Wrapping up the season and all. Haha. But first, before we get into it, Cassandra will kick us off with our divination corner.
Absolutely. I'm using tarot today, and I'm using the Spiral Tarot, one of my favorite decks. I pulled the Fool for our card today, and so basically, as a reminder, we do these largely as creative prompts, as actionable steps, and not as forecasting. So pulling the Fool does not mean we are forcing or plunging you into totally new adventures that you are not ready for in terms of like life overall. But I will say, as a creative prompt, as an actionable step, this is really, if you've been listening all season and you're like, I should do more creatively, the Fool, your prompt is basically like, get started. It's basically a dare. It's like, what are you waiting for? Why aren't you doing this? And so your prompt is to literally just like take the leap. That's it.
I love that. I feel like the Fool is such a weird card to like, when it comes up in readings, I'm just like, yep, okay, cool.
Just take the leap, start fresh, like nothing matters. Do what you want to do.
Awesome. So then to complement that, I will be working with runes again today. I got the Rido rune. So this is the one that looks like an R. And this actually complements the Fool very, very well because Rido sort of signifies the journey, the act of moving forward, the act of riding, and like in this case, like horseback riding or, like riding along the road or, whatever. So it's really a very, like, actionable rune. Again, it's like, just get started, just take that step. And I think it's also a really beautiful rune to come up, because it can also signify the wheel. And we will be talking about subjects today about, like, Wheel of the Year and stuff like that. So I do think that if you're, not sure exactly where to start, that looking to nature to sort of prompt you, whether that is, oh wow, it's really warm where I live right now. I want to try this new salad recipe. That is creativity. It could also be oh wow, like I saw this very beautiful flower and a bee on my walk, and now I want to write about that in a poem or something. So yeah, like definitely look to nature for inspiration this week. And beyond.
Yes. All right. And so I will jump in and let's introduce today's episode. We are doing seasonal witchcraft. And so even if you're hearing that and you're like, wow, that's, I don't want to learn about the Wheel of the Year again. We are doing that later. Hopefully we'll have some interesting things to say that you will still like. But I wanted to start by just saying that literally, if you are like new or starting and things like that feel really overwhelming to you, you can literally just practice with the seasons. And I will also say a lot of very, no pun intended, seasoned witches, myself and Siri included, often find ourselves being like, I don't have capacity for equinox this time. I'm just going to do a spring ritual when I have a minute. And so it really does become, the point of the more sort of heady calendar dates like that is to just honor the natural seasons. And so we wanted to talk about that first. We're recording this in spring, so let's start there. What is your spring witchcraft looking like as it finally starts heating up in Minnesota, Siri?
So I think that spring and fall actually for me as the transitional seasons. I was listening to Florence and the Machine the other day, and there's this line in one of her songs that is like, and there's a certain kind of sadness that comes with spring. And I definitely do feel some of
Mhm,
that vibe, like
mhm,
when all the snow goes away and you can see all the like detritus left behind after the winter. There is a certain kind of like, ooh, this is muddy. This is messy. Um, we're in the very like not pretty part of spring, but it's getting to the pretty part of spring here. Um, and so I do kind of try to like lean into those like, what am I finally really truly putting to bed from the winter, and how do I need to move on? Um I do think of spring and summer both as like very good times to work on like growing magic, attractive magic, manifestation kind of magic. And in particular, spring is very much a time when I'm thinking about like, okay, what are the seeds that I am sowing um as the year progresses? Because there's kind of, especially in Nordic magic, there's kind of a sense of um like increase with the light and then decrease with the darkness. Um and so the following the actual changes in light quality is really really important to me. Um and if you're living somewhere that's a little bit closer to the equator than where we live now,
mhm,
that might look a little different for you, and that's totally okay. You may not have traditional four seasons, and I want to say, like, before we really, really get into the episode, it's okay if you like live somewhere that doesn't have the
mhm,
traditional four seasons. For you, it may look like, oh, as the birds are migrating down here from the north, or there are other seasonal things, plants coming into season, plants leaving their season, all of that stuff that you may be more in tune with. Um, why don't I'm gonna gather some more thoughts upon like what kind of magic I do
mhm.
in spring. So why don't you take it on, Cassandra?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and this is part of why we wanted to cover the topic of seasonal magic overall, because it does look different for everyone. And I also want to say that while my sort of foundational practice, the thing that sets it up is like, to me, the biggest thing is learning to work with the seasons, because I do feel like sometimes we are trying to do spells that are like counter to the seasons. And so, if you're having a financial emergency, I don't want you to walk away from this feeling like, oh, I can't do money magic because it's banishing season. First of all, you can always do emergency magic. And if I'm being 100% honest, I tend to find that that works a little bit more, because will and determination are so important. And you never feel more determined than when you genuinely are in need. So, there's that piece of it, but the other thing I wanna say too is that we really want to encourage you to just think about things in a way. So, let's say we're in a season that for you, historically, traditionally, has to do with banishing. You still can do financial, like, abundance magic, but you would frame it as, like, banishing poverty, banishing debt, banishing financial concern. And
And
so
sometimes, honestly, like banishing debt or, doing protective magic around the money that you do have is a really, really important thing for you to do. But we
yeah.
often, in terms of money magic, I think that the default for so many people is just money coming in, money coming in, money coming in, right?
Well, and that's the capitalism of it, right? That we've all internalized, but that in the witchcraft and tarot and divination boom of the, like, earlier, late 2010s, early 2020s, it obviously got hyper capitalized and or capitalismed, and I think that's how we sort of are all viewing it through that lens, even when we try so hard to fight that. That's also why I used money magic as an example. Another example is if you are trying to find a romantic partner and you're in, say, a banishing season, it might be like, "Hey, banish the part of me that self-sabotages, bad the part of me that, like, keeps people away." So there's always ways to think about it, and then I actually wanna flip the example and say, let's say you have a scary situation. if you're in sort of an attractive season or period, or that's just where your magic is stronger, you certainly can and should still work to cleanse and purify and banish. At the same time, you also can say, like, attract people who will be protective to me in my home, attract energies, spirits that are going to help me do this protection work. Because a lot of the times, too, the point of seasonal magic is like remembering to work hand in hand with the earth and with the seasons and with the spirits of those seasons. And I think that sort of when we need that extra protection in a season that quote unquote isn't meant for that, then that's a way of saying, like, oh, hey, I trust you to do this work now, spirits that I'm working with. Whereas, like, later on, they might need you. Like, oh, hey, this other spirit is bugging the crap out of me. um,
Right.
and that's where your like banishing comes in. So again, it is just about critical if you take nothing else away from all 10 episodes of this podcast, let it be that you will, and Siri, keep that in because I meant it. But it is that you should think critically and figure out what is going to work and then get a little bit creative. So that's what I have to say about that, really. Now I'll get into the question you actually asked me, which is, what does spring witchcraft look like for me right now? Um, and so right now, so I do think that I think we think of spring as the time for, so you, as Siri said, you can cleanse all the gunk from the winter, right? I am, we are not doctors, we are witches. I want to say that. But for me, living in Minnesota, and we'll talk about this towards the end of the podcast, because you might have to split things up differently depending on the climate where you live. And depending on the changes that climate change is doing to your area. One thing new to the past several years, I am deathly allergic to snow fungus, which is something that started appearing in Minnesota that until the snow melts. So if you get like really bad spring allergies and didn't used to, and you live in a snowy climate, it may actually be the snow fungus. And I have hay fever too, but this knocks me out, right? Like, I almost have to take Benadryl or go to urgent care or something when it's like really bad. So in those times, I'm doing a lot of cleansing and protecting. And then once the snow fungus is gone, because other plants and funguses have popped up, that is when I start work on that growing magic. So that's sort of how things are breaking down for me. I will say the snow fungus doesn't seem quite as bad in this current thaw, but I think it's because it was earlier this year and it wasn't snowy long enough to like grow the fungus this time. So all of that to say, the magic I'm mostly doing right now is actually sort of jumping into my summer prep slash attractive magic. We all know I've talked a lot about gardening and houseplants and stuff on here. So this really is, any of my houseplants that have started seeding, time to pull those seeds if I don't want them to just make babies where they're sitting. Or on the other hand, it's like getting seeds ready to bud and to sprout and to all of that. So while that is technically a hobby, again, we're all about synthesization here, syncretism. So to me, that still falls under magic, right? So it's a lot of sort of prep for later spring. And again, that's a way that sort of that shifts because of both my climate where I live as well as climate change. So that's the big thing I'm doing. And again, everything is literal and everything is metaphors. That's the other big takeaway from me, at least on this. And so that also means like I'm kind of in a contract purgatory with a really important contract right now and stuff like that. So it's doing magic to kind of get those seeds good and planted so that come spring and later spring and summer, I'll know what the crap I'm actually doing with my life.
Yeah, for sure. I think that planting seeds also, like, so the way I often think about like abundance magic with spring and summer is that like planting seeds is preparatory work. Sometimes that is doing some cleansing and protection stuff because like your garden literally can't grow if the rabbits are eating everything as it comes up, right? So like you put up the protective fence.
I was just going to make the joke that it's the fucking squirrels here, but yeah.
Yes, yes, the squirrels have it out for both of us, but especially you. Um Um, and I think that summer then to me is like as things are blooming and blossoming, that's the like actual bringing like the attractive magic like in, right? So spring has very much set the stage. Um, I also find that you can kind of work with spring fever energy a little bit.
Oh, I love
Like
that. Yeah.
I feel like especially as, we live in a cold climate in, recording this podcast. So like we will definitely uh be stuck inside for much of the winter. Um and then spring comes along and it's like I swear to God, everybody in Minnesota forgets how to drive because
Oh
they're
my
just
God. It's so bad.
they just get so excited about the sun. So there's that. And then there's also just like people go bananas here. And you can work with that energy in yourself as like you feel it coming up in yourself. Like maybe you do have energy for that bigger ritual, right? Like if you were, feeling very low energy through the winter or for whatever reason, you can pick that energy back up in the spring. So, yeah. But let's kind of keep moving through the seasons.
The other thing, too, that I would say about spring cleaning and something that always sort of stands out to me. So, the reason that spring cleaning is a thing is probably because of sort of these folkloric roots that we're talking about. And it is also because of what Siri mentioned, that sort of fevered feeling of spring that can sometimes be like, I have been trapped in this house for too long and now I want to get rid of everything I own. So,
yes.
the so both spiritually and emotionally, the actual point of spring cleaning is very much to think about making space for new things. And so it's getting rid of things that you, your kids, your frequent visitors are not actually using, do not actually care about. And then in that space, sort of trusting that you will find or grow what needs to grow in that space. And I bring this up because that is super true, sort of in the metaphorical, in the sort of spiritual. We move away from things that are not working from us in life to make space for things that will pop up. And that's literally, and that's, I also bring this up now because that's also a good segue into summer when we sort of expect to see those things popping up. So we talked about spring as cleansing, protecting, growing anything that needs to grow, as sort of that planting seeds version of manifesting. And now we get into summer.
Yeah. So summer magic actually like um I do a lot of solar worship stuff. There are a ton of witches who are extremely lunar and I love that for them. That's fantastic. I have been like improving upon my own lunar practices. But once I really started working with solar magic, I felt like I found a groove that was really good for me. So, that is when I'm doing a lot of work with solar magic. In Nordic practice, that is with Suna, the sun goddess. Um, and I don't know, summer also, like this summer, I have plans to do glamour magic, which, we talked about a few episodes ago at this point. But essentially, like, summer is, I get reverse sad, so I get seasonal affective disorder in the summer, and it's really bad, y'all. Like, I also have a really hard time, like, summer fashion is my least favorite fashion. I'm pretty heat intolerant. I, feel like, like, the only summer fashion that I like is feminine fashion, and then I feel kind of, like, gender dysphoric about it because it's also not the fashion that I want to be. It's a whole thing. So I'm going to be doing more glamour magic this upcoming summer season to try to mitigate some of those impacts and to like learn how to like live in better step with this season. Um because yeah, I'm sick of feeling that way. And summer is also like summer looks good on Minneapolis, y'all. Like summer is when so much happens and so much comes alive and I want to be feeling good and fun for that and not like mad and sad.
Yeah. Glamour magic is so good in the summer. A thing that we will talk about again a little bit later is pulling on sort of like themes and threads, and I would argue even like egregores or group spirit magic. But summer is so good for that because you're outside a lot. And especially for those of us who are queer witches, a lot of super lefty witches like Siri and I that are also queer will try to avoid a lot of the bigger events, either for political reasons or frankly because we can be a little bit hipster and it's like, oh, that's passe. No one goes to the park anymore. Like, whatever. um and so I people will always say it's for political reasons, but I do feel like there's an element of that in it for most people. At the same time, that is where so in the literal, right, in the quote unquote mundane, in the tangible, and here at Chaos and Cunning, we're all about blurring that line, but bear with me. Um, we think about pride for those of us who are also like gender, who consider ourselves gender and sexuality like educators, even if it's by accident, like I'm doing it through witchcraft and tarot, stuff like that. Pride is where we can really talk to a lot of people who are maybe on their journey to expanding their world wider and wider. So
That's
when
what
we're
you meant by nobody goes to the park anymore. You were talking
yeah,
about the Pride Festival in the park.
yeah.
I was like, speak for yourself. I love the park.
Oh, no, I meant like during Pride specifically. And so but we can also pull on that magically, right? Like we can also um sort of be on the outskirts of the festival, which frankly is one of my favorite parts for people watching and also just chilling and knowing you're surrounded by queer people is just sitting on the grassy knolls outside of it. But then you can sort of like work with that egregore, with that energy to again sort of shift. You can either use all of that goodwill, people are there because they're queer or they're allies, to sort of do some of your political magic, something like that. Alternatively, if you're like, hey, a lot of these people, whatever, you can try to shift the tides just so that people, again, we are wanting to help people get more expansive. We're not pulling on specific people's energy without consent, but we are like, oh, hey, everyone needs to get more sort of aware of themselves and in love with themselves. And so those big group things, and it doesn't have to be Pride because at least in Minnesota, summer is the time of every weekend, at least one street festival. And so it can really be any of that. If you're wanting more funding for the arts, you can go to a jam-packed arts event and sort of work with that egregore to be like, how can we make this state as well as country just like fund this community of artists better? Things like that. Unrelated to any of that, um, it's a good season for sex magic if you are not like me. I am a very sex positive person. I hate being hot, and sex is hot and like literally temperature wise and whatever. So I actually do less sex magic in summer than I do the rest of the time. But for a lot of people, it is that sort of Helios, that sun, that solar energy that we talked about. And I will say that that is the energy that I call on the rest of the year for that type of magic. But anything that we would call sex magic, I just don't have a strong drive to do in the summer, and it feels gross, honestly, because of all the sweat. So,
Yeah.
um,
I think that there is something to be said though for like a lot of people just wearing their skimpiest little outfits.
oh yeah.
And you know, like it is a season where I think that a lot of people are practicing sex magic, practicing glamour magic specifically. Um and
Well, and I will
that's
say,
chill.
yeah,
That's cool. That's not something I
um,
experience as much as an asexual person. I'm just
right.
kind of like, "Oh wow, your shorts are cool."
Yeah.
Not
I
not like you look hot in your shorts.
yes, and I will say that I do love my summer looks or fits a lot of the time. But it is when both gender dysphoria as well as just like internalized self-image stuff as a fat person navigating the world like rises to the surface. Like I feel so comfortable in just a frilly little skirt and short bike shorts under it. I feel like I'm like in my femme bliss, and then I remember that other people can see me and I like crumble. So
Yeah.
And yes, for everyone listening who wants to give us advice, everything we bring up are things we are working on magically and emotionally, so don't at us.
Yeah, we're chill. Like we're doing the work.
Yeah, so that's sort of summer in a nutshell. I also think anything that you would deem working with the sun, that solar energy, we tend to think of autumn, at least I do, as lunar work and lunar magic. And I am actually very solar and lunar. It took me a while to sort of tap into solar energy, but once I did, I was all in. And a lot of that is because I'm such a night owl. And so solar energy felt like, you want me to wake up to do an entire ritual? Absolutely the fuck not. I also want to say, too, as a pagan, as a polytheist, it's not always about getting what you want through witchcraft, right? And so summer is also when I can give a lot of flowers and grow a lot of flowers for my deities, like in devotion to them. It's also the time where I can just bask in the sun and know that I'm with those sun gods and those summer spirits. I am a very watery witch, and so I love walking down the river. I love sitting at the lake. All of these things that can be very magical if you want them to be. And a lot of times it's literally just casting spells for like, I hope the lake stays healthy this year, which does feel like a silly act of futility because we always get the E. coli, but I try.
Yeah. I think that that stuff is really important. And I was just gonna say, that water magic, and that is a unique thing that I feel in summer that I feel very connected to is water magic. And that's because in the winter it's frozen, and in the spring it's too cold to get in, and in the autumn everything's drying up. So summer is like, yes, this is the season where I'm working the most with water as an element.
So I also want to say we did talk a lot about spring and summer because that's when this is going to be airing. And also we've actually talked quite a bit about autumn and winter. So autumn we tend to think of as like spirit contact, death work, ancestral veneration feasts. It's also one thing I think that so that is like my favorite part of autumn witchcraft, right? I have multiple spirit boards. I have multiple ways to contact spirits. We've talked about all of that. One of my favorite things to do in the world is go sit in the graveyard and just exist. So there's all of that, but it's easy for me to overlook that late autumn especially is supposed to be about grabbing those final garden harvests and prepping for winter, which again, we mean that literally. We mean, sometimes a lot of stuff gets canceled in winter, so you might not be making as much money. We mean if you don't live with your partner and you are in a really solid relationship, but it takes a hit in winter because neither of you want to leave your house, right? Autumn is when you come up with all of those plans and the magic and the mundane to sort of circumvent a lot of that. And so that can
Yeah.
be very spiritual work as well.
Yeah, I do think that prepping for winter slash hard times, like that preparatory energy you can also think of as fortifying energy, so strengthening energy. A lot of Nordic feasts in the fall are about um winter prep stuff and fortification and everything.
Mhm.
Um
And then we get to winter, and again, this is still a lot of time for spirit contact. I think it is anecdotal. I don't think there's any, like, para normal pseudoscience, like, actually established about this, or there probably is. Y'all will probably at me in the comments, and that's fine. But I feel like it is very anecdotal that when it's darker for longer, there just is more spirit activity. Now, I personally think we're just more aware of it because the sun shines light on a lot of other things within ourselves or our microcosm that we need to deal with. And so with winter, like we internally start slowing down earlier because the sun's not out as long. And so when we are slowing down, I think is when we're just more susceptible to spirit work. But nonetheless, listen to our episode on spirit contact. um and then I want to let Siri talk about dream magic and banishing because I'm excited to hear what they say about that.
Yeah, so dream magic. So dream magic obviously can happen at any time. I do find that my dreams are a lot more active in the winter. And I think it's because, like, here it is literally darker longer. I think that my personal explanation for it is that my subconscious has more time to like get ready for sleep. Um and I also just have more of a focus on it.
Mhm.
So one of the things that I love doing is setting an intention before I go to bed and then seeing if any of the symbols in my dreams sort of help me make sense of that. I pay close attention to my dreams, recurring themes in them, all of that kind of thing. Another thing that I started doing actually, is pulling a card or a rune or some kind of divination tool, doing a tea leaf reading for myself before bed.
Mhm.
And then that sort of like foretells what might be coming in my dreams. Um, Another good thing for winter is to focus on more banishing magic. I think especially like I have this like perception that in the winter, um, oh my God, I just saw this flash of a meme that's like, if you're cold, they're cold, let you in, but it's like ghosts.
Yeah.
And like ghoulies and spirits that you don't want in your home, right? It's like I feel like there is I do feel like there's a bit of that, and this could also be because of the strong tradition of the wild hunt in
Mm.
Germanic and Nordic practices, right? So I definitely do like the wild hunt feels very real to me at times, and that is an autumn thing, an autumnal thing, which is also, like, doing more protection work in the autumn to sort of seal your home. Strengthening your wards in autumn, I think, is a really good idea. And then like maintaining them over the course of the winter is really important as well. And then winter is very good for doing a lot of like the deep inner work that maybe in the summer like you don't have a ton of time to do. And so I'm
Mhm.
talking specifically about shadow work. So doing some of those things like excavating things from your own personal, shadow, examining them, doing a lot more divination to get to know these aspects of self, doing a lot more divination in order to, focus on healing as well. Just because, like I said, at least in Minnesota, things are so much slower in the winter. So, like, I feel like I have so much more time for that reflective energy.
I also one thing I will piggyback on that to say is that right now, the concept of analog hobbies is having a moment, which feels really bizarre to Siri and I because we've always been hobby people. And we've also always been multi-passionates, and I do think that in late stage capitalism, right, like, it's a fine line, and I don't think you should monetize all your hobbies, and I also fully empathize with the impulse to do so. Since I started video gaming and I'm not good, I have been like, "Should I just start a Twitch and try to make some extra money?" Like, it poisons all of our brains, like, I
It
don't wanna do
does.
that. Like, but all of that to say winter is a really good time to either pick up or get back to analog hobbies that can be magic. So I'm thinking of you like, knitting and as you go, putting magical intentions into it, working with the yarn itself, etc. And then that's not me, but I know that fiber arts go hard in the winter. Like that's what people are doing their stuff to sell in spring and summer. So I might be practicing more like not magic or magic with yarn and string and stuff like that to sort of play on that collective energy that is rising. I and so I think that that is interesting and cool. And then a big thing for me is writing the things that will probably never get published, right? Like really mediocre fanfic, bad poems, etc. And so incorporating magic into all of those things because again, in the winter when we're inside more, we're more prone to take to those hobbies. And so that's when we can really sort of get creative and crafty literally about our witchcraft and where it's coming from and what's going into it.
Yeah. So, what are some ways that we honor the seasons and the quote unquote wheel turning, even if honoring too many special days is too much? What are some things we do along the way?
So definitely when it's clearly spring or clearly summer, especially if I felt like the wheel of the year Sabbats, which we'll talk about in a moment, were like not the time or I just couldn't get them or whatever. I do gather flowers for my altar and for my deities and spirits, largely as a thank you for the things that they have done for me, and also to sort of honor, but also to honor the season, I think. To me, I'm not only saying, "Hey, goddess or devil that I work with, thank you specifically." I'm also saying, like, thank you to spring. I think that the seasons turning also do serve as sort of emotional stop points for a lot of us, and to me, spring is sort of the reminder that the light always returns no matter what is going on. And so, to me, buying flowers when it's, like, clearly spring, like me being like, "Hey, spring, I see you. I love you. Thank you. Snow fungus and all, I do love you." So that's one, and then I think in winter, everyone's always talking about moon water this and moon water that, but, like, do not underestimate the power of moon snow. Like, it is if it blizzards on a full or dark moon, bottle that shit up. Like, it's so powerful and so good. And so those are
Yeah.
and then autumn, I would say summer and autumn are also my graveyard walking times, but to different purpose, which we've talked about. So those are some of mine.
Yeah, I think for me, walking in general is really important no matter the season. I think that I do a
Mm.
ton of just like going on long walks. It's important for my creative process sometimes to like go on a walk and think about other things that like creative process stuff, get my brain off of whatever was frustrating me in the writing session and like move into the walking. That was a really weird way of putting it. Oh well, I'm not going to change it.
I'm
Um
for it. A plus.
I stand by moving into the walking. Anyway, uh yeah, I do think that that is also a way that I observe the seasons. A lot of seasonal magic for me is observational. It is maintaining relationships with, different spirits. And I'm kind of cataloging like nature spirits and like deity work and like a ton of stuff like in that, because um a lot of these observations are really um prescient as you kind of take the same route season after
Mhm.
season. You notice things more deeply. If walking is not accessible for you, another thing that you can do that I know a lot of people do is have a specific seat where they can look out a window, and looking out the same window for a period of time so that you're like observing the changes in that window is also another really good like way to pair this. I actually, so I think this is a good segue into the question of why seasonal magic is important. Why we're even talking about this. I feel like maybe we should have talked about that earlier in the episode, but oh well.
I disagree. I think we're golden.
Okay, cool.
I think whatever happens is what's meant to happen. If you know me, I don't think that at all. When clients
Yeah.
are like when when tarot clients ask me why did this happen, I am a bummer and I'm like, usually the answer is, well, because other people regrettably also have free will. And so it was not to teach you a big spiritual lesson, actually. It was because other people are also allowed to do whatever they want. And sometimes that freaking sucks. So, but anyway, yes. For me, I think one thing I got into a lot when I talked about spring, I'm just going to go through what's been sort of galaxy braining me at the moment, which is the cycle of plant life. And specifically, one thing I didn't talk about in autumn and winter, but I think is so important. So we'll get into that. We're in spring, right? We're airing this in spring. That's why there was so much spring conversation. So Spring represents both planting the seeds, but also the plants like sprouting and budding. And then summer is the bloom, and then late summer is the harvest. Autumn is still more harvest. And then it's prep for winter and wintering over, which is sort of like protecting the plants. And then from there, there is a period of death and of composting. But remember that that cycle for most things is not death forever. It is more common for well protected plants to come back in the spring. And if something does die out, it is because its lifetime is over. And so and yes, there's a grief in that, but there's also a beauty to it because, again, in that space, you have the opportunity to try something new or to plant something new. So that's how plants work, right? We all know this. We all went to third grade science. But when we are talking about magic, to me, that is just such a beautiful way to look at sort of the life cycle of, say, a spell or a desire or something like that. It's like we plant the seeds, the thing happens, we harvest it, and we let anything that didn't quite turn out the way we expect to go to seed, winter over, compost, and try again, or move on entirely in the spring. And so to me, that like is the life cycle of a magical working as well, whether it is an act of devotion or a spell, I should say. So we observe seasonal witchcraft because it also teaches us more about ourselves and life and nature and the nature of spirit in general, in my opinion. And when you are really tapped into that seasonal flow, it's very easy to call on any of the other seasons to be like, hey, I know I can rewrite this spell to say this, but I really need this autumn energy. I really need this visitor that usually just comes to me in spring. And so it becomes about that as well.
Yeah, yeah. I think that there is also something that is kind of like um in following the seasons and the cycles, there is something that is like decoupling me from capitalism in a bit, in a way. You know, it's like not everything is a time for grow, grow, grow now, now, now.
Hmm.
You know, not everything is a time for constant abundance, right? You know, like we learn from nature that there are ways that these other aspects of life are beautiful. And I think that decoupling from capitalism is a lifelong journey. So, you know, I say this as somebody who's been working on this for a really long
Hmm.
time, right? Um, and I do think that nature is one of the ways that we can observe that because, you know, I'm going to talk a little bit like econ lingo. Sorry for the jump scare. Um,
Trigger
but
warning, econ language.
yeah. Um, but like there is such a thing as the tragedy of the commons, and so the tragedy of the commons is this kind of like people see, you know, common spaces, environmental spaces as these like um endless regions for production, and also because they're public lands or public goods, people are taking too much from them. Um there's nothing to slow them down, right? And I think that if you are following natural cycles, you sort of start to like your impulse is not to participate in the tragedy of the commons, right? Like your impulse is to um allow for things to grow slowly, to allow for you know, things to be beautiful and slow and all of that. Um, Another thing that I think of with following natural rhythms and cycles is, you know, like so often we think of things as like supply and demand because we live
Hmm.
in late stage capitalism,
Hmm.
but this like nature isn't like that. Like nature doesn't live that way. Um
And doesn't
and
really give a shit that we do.
right. Yeah. So like just getting more in tune with that, I think, is really important. And that's really important on a devotional level for me. It is really important on a spiritual level for me, and not necessarily like, you know, I need to get all the things that I want in life and live my best life and all of that stuff, which I feel like so often, as we kind of talked about earlier, um, there's a trend for hyper capitalism within spiritual spaces now because of the proliferation of, you know, witch spaces. And I'm not even going to say on technology. It's just like
It's
there was a
everywhere.
it's everywhere. There was a huge boom in tarot and witchcraft books, and now people are like, "Oh, I'm going to make a quick buck like in this community." But so many of us who've been doing this work for so long and who feel very strongly that this is our spiritual life, like we're not thinking that way. We're not doing that in our practices. I came to witchcraft specifically because I felt so connected with the earth, and I felt weird in a religion that was not as connected, right? So I think that seasonal magic for me, it's so much more devotional. It's so much more focused on how things are growing and changing and all of that. And it brings me back to the why of my practice in a lot of ways.
That's really beautiful. I Part of me wants to be in conversation with that, and part of me thinks you said everything that I would say, so let's move on.
All right,
Um,
cool.
because a lot of this is deeply affected by climate change, and this is a question I get a lot from clients and from students. Is very like, well, why am I doing the same spring magic? And the thing is, you shouldn't be. In the time of climate change, and I would even argue climate crisis, it can, and also, again, I would argue should look a little bit different. Now, I also think that this speaks to the fact that every climate is different, and you can absolutely celebrate the wheel of the year and the tide turning, even if you, like, quote unquote, don't have a winter where you are. Like, something still happens in those months that is different than the rest of the year. So it's just a matter of tapping into that. So with climate change, we do have to learn to be more adaptable. And I think this is where witches should be shining, right? Because we should be getting our cues from the earth, and we should be reciprocating a lot of that love and support and care that the earth gives us. And we should be doing our part. We should be recycling, even if where we live doesn't make that convenient, at a bare minimum. And we should be working really to like reduce our trash, reduce these other things. I feel awful saying that right now because I have a baby. And if you know anything about babies, my trash is not reduced right now. But I try to give back in other ways, including tending the land that I'm on, making sure that those plants are able to thrive, doing what I need to do there. And so, but again, it does shift, it does change. I just talked about how basically there are, to me, in my mind, there's like early spring and late spring, and there's early autumn and late autumn. And I think that whatever that seasonal shift looks like for you, because I will say until the snow fungus, I did celebrate spring as a whole. And now I'm like, okay, it's early spring, time to focus on my own body and protecting it, and also learning how to exist on Earth with this fungus that has always been here but has never been as bad until the past several years. Yeah, and then, autumn, it kind of is split in the wheel of the year for us because there's the final harvest in Samhain, and then there's still more autumn after that. And so it kind of says like, oh, well, part of this autumn is for final harvest, and the other part of autumn is for this other work that we talked about. So I think, but I think for more and more people, the weather split and the fact that we're not really having four seasons anymore, we're having a lot of micro seasons. Again, it means you need to be adaptable, but I also do think that it's teaching us, when I talked about how all of this teaches us to be a living thing, because plants also are, I don't know, in some ways it almost feels like warnings and omens from the weather and from the plants of like, okay, how can we learn to regenerate and adapt quicker?
Yeah, yeah, and I think too with climate change, like it's like a feeling, right? Like if you're in tune with where you live, it's like, oh, like spring is happening today. Like
Yeah.
I feel that spring today.
Yep.
Um I also think that a lot of the feast days, which we will be talking about very shortly
Mhm.
here, like a lot of the feast days are opportunities to get together with your fellow witchy community, your fellow coven, all of that. If you don't have, um, you know, if you do have that, that's beautiful. And that also means there's always inevitably a scheduling conversation. Like the amounts of covens that just are like, like struggle with scheduling stuff, right? Is kind of crazy. So like having those set days to practice can be really helpful if you do have more of a coven structure, if you are working with other people, and you can shift what you do on those feast days or calendar days to better suit what you're doing. Or not what you're doing, to better suit the actual season around you. Which is where I think that some of the, especially like the traditional Sabbats, we're talking about like, yes, we're talking about seasons, but we're also talking about a metaphorical energy shift throughout the year. Um, and that can be really helpful. In terms of practical climate change application and working with it, so in Minnesota, you can join from elsewhere, but it started in Minnesota.
Mhm.
There is this beautiful group in the Nordic community called the Primstav Study, which Primstav is a calendar stick from, medieval, essentially, like Norway and Sweden. And so there's a lot of agrarian knowledge built into studying the symbols and studying like what feasts people were doing and what symbols they associated with those feasts. So there's a way of tracking like ancestral knowledge there, and also like what were people doing at different times in the year. And now at a time of rapid climate change, rapid climate crisis, looking back on these primstavs is like, oh, this is a time capsule of like what the climate was like when, my medieval ancestors were doing X things. And so as a group, we come together on Facebook and we, just make natural observances. And it'll be like, okay, well, Bear Wake isn't until, like late April, but maybe somebody in northern Minnesota did see a bear. Um, in their neighborhood, or maybe they did hear um the cuckoo calling, which that's specific. They probably didn't hear a cuckoo if they were in northern Minnesota, but
Mhm.
I was just thinking of cuckoo mass is the thing. Um so that's one really practical way that I have looked at and explored, um literally taking the time and documenting the changes throughout the years. Another thing you can do, like you can get a 5-year journal and just make nature observances and see how that shifts over the course of the 5 years that you keep it. All of these things are ways that you can engage with climate change within your practice, and how you can shift your own personal festivals.
Agreed. So this is a little bit of a weird segue, but we've talked a lot about the Wheel of the Year and do witches need to follow it. And I actually think that Siri and I have slightly different takes on that, in spite of the fact that I am a pretty strict Wheel of the Year practitioner and Siri is not as strict. I think it's kind of funny how our opinions shook out as we were doing this. So yeah, basically the Wheel of the Year, if you don't know what this is, it is an 8-date calendar with what are called sabbats, and I read way more than I talk to humans, so I might be pronouncing that wrong. But basically that calendar came about as an amalgamation or conglomeration of many different pagan festivals from all over the world, kind of all in one. There's also some stuff that is straight up made up in it, and that's fine. We're going to talk about why that doesn't matter because everything's made up.
Well, it's also not all over the world. It's generally like Northern
That's
European
fair.
and
That's fair.
Celtic. Yeah. I
Yeah.
don't want people to be like, oh, I can find like African festivals in here. Nah.
No. No, that's super fair.
Yeah.
Super, super fair. Now, I will be clear that there obviously are very important African spiritual festivals that you can find information on, but they're generally
Yes.
not encompassed by the Wheel of the Year.
Yes.
So, Siri is going to talk a little bit about the history piece.
Yeah, so Gerald Gardner and the Wiccans. Oh, the Wiccans of like the mid-century even Wiccans were really important to how a lot of pagans practice today. Um Love them or hate them, right? So Gerald Gardner had a strong hand in the revival of festivals on the modern Wheel of the Year. So he kind of started, this was also to kind of give Wiccans, across essentially like Europe and North America, a way of celebrating things together, right? Because holidays are fun. Holidays are fun. If you're creating a religion, like
Mhm.
you want there to be holidays because people will get excited. So he started with the 4 Celtic fire festivals, those being Samhain, Imbolc, Beltane, and Lunasa. Yeah, so he's expanded with the solstices and equinoxes, and for those of you who don't know, the solstices are midsummer and Yule, and the equinoxes, which is when the light and dark are equal in the day, are now called Ostara and Mabon. But you can also just call them the spring equinox and the fall, the autumnal equinox. Like everything is made up. Yes. Um, so I would say that the Wheel of the Year is modern in creation, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't follow it. It's a unifying thing for a lot of pagans, like even people who are not, practicing an explicitly um Celtic centered um, you know, like branch of the pagan community. Like it's kind of a flashpoint where we can all be like, okay, like what are you doing for this thing, right? So it's fun to participate. You absolutely do not need to.
So yeah, again, very modern in creation, but one thing Siri and I also both fundamentally believe that is also very chaos magic is no matter how ancient we are claiming to get, there is so much oral history and so much passing down of things orally and so much getting missed or outright rewritten or erased throughout history as things did get written down, that the fact that something is newer doesn't mean it's better or less accurate. And so I think if we are, to me, I tend to look at witchcraft the way that I would look at most pseudoscience, which is when there are science updates and things we know, we go with it. You know what I mean? Even if what we're practicing isn't like scientific. And so that's sort of how I see a lot of this as well. It's a very unifying thing for pagans, and I also just think it is the easiest way to get into honoring the Wheel of the Year, even if all you are doing is marking and noticing, like, oh, today is Beltane. Oh, today is Imbolc. Even if that's all you are doing, it is a good way to get started, like a lot of what Siri is doing with a lot of Nordic work and things like that. So, Siri has so many dates that I don't celebrate because they're Nordic calendar and not other calendar. So obviously, you and you know what feels best to you. And so if you honor a different one, a different calendar that is connected to your ancestry or a specific thread of witchcraft, I know Chaos Magic has their completely own calendar. I know Thelema has their completely own calendar. So but Siri and I are also, as chaos witches, we're also very like cut and paste. Like you can do some of the Wheel of the Year and some of the other kinds that you do, like mix it up whatever feels good to you.
Yeah, like for example, we're going to talk about what are some of the most important festivals in our own personal wheels of the year. And so I still list Samhain as one of the most important festivals on my wheel of the year, not because I'm a Celtic witch or that I'm celebrating Samhain in the like traditional fire festival like sense of it or trying to reconstruct like a Celtic practice. I celebrate it because it was the most important holiday to me when I became a witch.
Right.
Um And a lot of that is because I've always loved Halloween, which is, secular. And so I was like, "Oh, you mean I get to be spiritual on this day too? That's really cool. I love that." Um, and it also, works with a lot of things that I do celebrate now, such as All Souls Day, for example. So I think that that is the biggest one for me. Um, is I still celebrate Samhain, and use that name, Samhain, even though I'm not a Celtic witch in any way, really.
Well, and I really like you saying that because you can also, our sort of final point on Wheel of the Year overall is that you can shift what the Sabbats mean to you. So if you're looking it up and you are somewhere with a completely different climate than Siri and I, and you're like, wow, this thing about Imbolc does not speak to me or where I live at all, that's fine. You can note the date and think about what that does look like where you are and what that witchcraft and spiritual work might be beneficial for in that time for you. So you can absolutely shift what they mean. And then I would also say there's some personal things as well. I often find myself where I feel a lot of dissonance is when Siri talked about not necessarily feeling like a lunar witch a lot of the time. Where I feel a lot of dissonance is in autumn, everyone is talking about everything that is dying. And yes, that is true and that is real. But to me, autumn has always felt like a fresh start. If for no other reason
Mm.
than I like to be left alone like a weird little guy in my apartment. But it's also a fresh start because for how many years of our lives, that's when school started. And to me, that was always an opportunity to reinvent myself and to decide who I was going to be that year and play with different personalities and styles and everything else. And so when we talk about that summer glamour magic, to me, that very often trickles down into like, okay, we're doing that for Samhain. We're doing that, in that period. And that is totally fine.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that we're also kind of getting into what important festivals are happening in our own Wheel of the Year. And we'll also talk about, because this is a very cute little podcast by two cute little friends, we'll be talking about the things that we do together.
Yeah.
Um, so for me, Walpurgisnacht is very important. That is, if you don't know, that is April 30th. And it is a time for a lot of spirit flight, but also if you work with any folkloric devils, I find that Walpurgisnacht is a very good day to sort of renew those contracts. Um, because it is traditionally understood as like the witch is going to feast and party with the devil, essentially. So if you do any of that, Walpurgisnacht is important. Midsummer is probably one of the most important holidays in Nordic practices. It
Uh-huh.
is considered when nature, like as a whole, is at the height of its power. And so any harvesting that you do on Midsummer is extra blessed. There are different like charms and rituals that you can do on Midsummer that are supposed to help you throughout the year. It is definitely a time of like, I'm going to take in and lavish in and celebrate all of this magical power that is swirling in the air. And that is why I say it's Midsommar, not midsummer, because, like midsummer means something different to other people, but I'm talking about it specifically in this tradition.
Uh-huh.
Um, so I have Imbolc slash Candlemas on here. Imbolc never really resonated to me because people would always talk about it as the beginning of spring, but if you know anything about Minnesota and Wisconsin, like February 1st is not the beginning of spring here. That is like depths of winter. And so that never really resonated with me. But then later when I found out that Imbolc was um like associated with Candlemas, I was like, ooh, that's really interesting. Because Candlemas is essentially a holiday where it's a folk Catholic holiday where you bless all of the candles that you will use in your magic throughout the year. So you're basically like starting this, like, stoking the seed of fire magic, which I find to be really beautiful. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that makes perfect sense to me because, like, it's still winter, it's still really dark, like, candles are, like, illuminating that darkness. That makes so much sense to me. So I tend to celebrate that one, but I don't think of it as Imbolc as much. Um, and then I already talked about Samhain and All Souls Day a little bit. I'm on a little, like, a weird little folk Catholic journey that I will talk about more when we talk about our Chaos and Cunning work. For someone who works with folkloric devils, I sure do also work with Mary a lot. It's weird. I'll talk about it. um, but All Souls Day has been really important to me. One of the most impactful experiences that I had in the last few years actually was attending an All Souls Day mass where, essentially if you're not Catholic, All Souls Day is where you go and you pray and you are basically honoring all of the souls that that have passed on. So it's a really big, important day for venerating people that you directly know. Yeah, no. And then All Saints Day, which I think that a lot of people who are not Catholic kind of conflate All Souls Day and All Saints Day because they're right next to each other. But All Saints Day is when you are essentially like praying to the huge chorus of saints, being like, "Hi, thank you for being saints,"
Yeah.
essentially. So that's why I say All Souls Day specifically. Then Beltane is also very important to me, and this is because I live in Minneapolis specifically. Like, we have a massive puppet May Day festival and parade that happens every year, and I love it so goddamn much. And it feels like that is like Minneapolis, like waking up from the dead of winter.
Well,
Um,
and one thing we didn't really get a chance to talk about, but the reason Beltane/May Day is so important to me, even outside of living in Minneapolis, is I feel like you and I's calendars also shift and change for political reasons. And so the fact that May Day is also a huge labor activist day and also a huge sort of like niche party that are not the big two day on the left, I think because those things are so central to it. To me, it's impossible to separate Beltane from that. Like, to me, it feels like spiritually not a coincidence that that's how those coincide. And so it's like looking at what the magic of the season is capable of boosting and also reminding us all that like our voice and our actions matter. And so I have no desire to separate Beltane from May Day either.
Absolutely. I thank you for chiming in with that because I feel very much the same way.
Mhm.
Um, And then, of course, I celebrate Yule. I grew up Christian, so I do celebrate Christmas. Yule feels like a very important time for me now. It's when I renew the spirit contracts with my Nissa, specifically. Um, and then one of my holiest days out of the year is actually New Year's Day. So I have a lot of superstitions and practices that I do on New Year's Day to like set me up for the calendar year. Um, like I go for my annual omen walk on New Year's Day typically. I do a lot of divination on that day typically. I spend a lot of time writing and I try to do things on New Year's Day that I want to and intend to continue doing throughout the year. So for example, I really like to set aside time to write, even if it's half an hour on New Year's Day. It's important to me that I write on that day because I want writing to be a habit and something that I do throughout the year.
So I try to honor the 8 Wheel of the Year days, but if nothing else, I always get in Samhain, Yule, and Beltane for a lot of the reasons that you mentioned. So I will also say that I am a secular holiday celebrator. I am a huge fan of seasonal fun. This episode was difficult for me because I like narrowing it all down to like which things I'm going to talk about was really hard. I always say that you can take the party queer out of the party, but you can't like actually make them stop partying. And so the way that energy has translated in alcohol sobriety is literally like trying to make every day magical for myself and the people in my life. And so because of that, I have so many holidays that mark the way. But that also means the wheel of the year can get a little lost, because if you know me at all or have followed me for any length of time, you know that in my 41 years, I have basically had 93 lifetimes. So as stuff gets lost and buried. But I always do Samhain. I also always do Halloween, especially now that I have a kiddo. I think the secular, like, I don't know, it's so great. And to me, it's like a special day with my kiddo. And same with Yule and Christmas. And Christmas was a harder sell with my co-parent because they have a lot of religious trauma syndrome. And I do too in some ways. I wouldn't say I have the syndrome, but I also have religious trauma. And so I get their reasons, and then also to me, Christmas was never actually about the tiny baby Jesus. It was always like, this is when people don't work and we can all spend a lot of time together. So that is sort of what the entire Christmas season is to me. And then Beltane, if nothing else, again, for the reasons that we talked about. So another thing that I do, if I do feel like I have been missing Sabbats or I'm just not keeping up the way that I want, I will mark a new sun sign cycle the way that I would a Sabbat. So I actually just did a big thing for Aries because I wasn't fully satisfied with my own level of work that went into Imbolc. And so I took the start of Aries season instead, to do a lot of that. So that is another way to approach this. And then you just will have one of those every month. And so if 8 days is intimidating to you, maybe don't go that route. So,
Yeah.
um, I'm also big on Walpurgisnacht. A lot of times I am a Hecate devotee, and a lot of times I will combine Walpurgisnacht with Hecate devotions. But I also work with a lot of the devil, a lot of devil-ish figures, archetypes throughout, mythology and whatever. So a lot of times Walpurgisnacht and Hecatean work kind of end up folding in together that way. It's just like a celebration of witchcraft. A dumb supper, if you don't know, a lot of sort of threads of witchcraft or theist devotion have it. With Hecate, it specifically is supposed to happen on the new moon, and it's basically you just eat a supper in silence and then give her some at the nearest crossroads as well. And obviously keep it animal safe, because the Hecatean myth is like, if an animal eats it, that's what Hecate wanted. And if not, it just like composts and goes back into the ground like we talked about. So I try to do at least one of those a year, and I say that because it's often very tied to Walpurgisnacht, because that's sort of when that is. I am a really big birthday person for people that I'm close to. Now, this does get a little unwieldy, and I don't have any advice about that. It's just unwieldy when you love as many people as I love. Another thing about me is I love, love, love birthdays. I do treat my own at least like a Sabbath. And I also treat the people closest to me is that way as much as they'll let me. So there's definitely that. And then I think Siri can tell you that I try to make birthdays magical for everyone. The amount of times that a friend has come to me and been like, oh yeah, I'm not really doing anything. And I'm like, over my dead body. So yeah, birthdays also become another way for me to mark the year, essentially. Like, oh, this is the season of Siri and my friend Jesse's birthday. And oh, this is the season of this person's birthday. So someone will ask what me and my girlfriend are up to in February, March. And I'm like, well, that's birthday season. So I'll have to let you know, So that is another way that I both mark time and do that. New Year's Day is big for me too, but I will say New Year's Eve is really big for me. Because I live 100 different lifetimes in a year, there is so much that I just want to put into the tomb forever. And so I take New Year's Eve, the day of New Year's Eve, to do that. And then New Year's Day, I do a lot of the same stuff Siri does. I will say I am like, my planner and I, usually we have a really nice, long, sexy date, like the day my planner for that year comes in, which is usually several months ahead of the year coming. So I don't need quite as much of that like organization for the year and stuff. But if I do, that's when I do it. Another thing I want to talk about, though, is just days that are significant for no reason to you or for deeply personal reasons. I won't get into the story again because it's people have heard it from me a lot, but me and my queer platonic partner definitely celebrate Otter Day, which is literally just a day that we were standing outside and a really fat otter ran up to us, stared at us, and ran off. And it was like huffing and puffing. And we literally thought it was so funny that we marked it on the calendar. We were like, today is Otter Day forever. So but then commemorating big things on your life journey is really important. I have a day I left my toxic first college on my calendar that every single year I give so many gifts to the gods because I essentially feel like thank you for getting me out of the situation that I was living in. For some people, it might be there also may be days that were sort of like important to your gender transition, your coming out, your first relationship that you felt marked you as queer, even and like it's again how you feel, not what anyone else would call queer. Anything like that. That can all be included, and I have several of those markers along the way. And again, sometimes we do this big hefty magic that we're talking about, but sometimes commemorating the day is literally just like, oh, hey, it's Otter Day. And we're like, oh, haha, remember the otter? And then you just go on with your day. Like, I would say pick no more than monthly that feel deeply important to you to start. And I would honestly start with like 4 times a year that you keep up a few days, which is why we went so hard on just the seasons in the beginning. Otherwise, it is gonna get a little bit overwhelming.
Totally. And also remember that like a lot of holiday stuff is just very secular and is just community stuff. So like we celebrate together, our practices are very different. So like we're not necessarily doing ritual together, although we do, of course. Um, but we have some traditions between our households, like on on or around May Day, we like to rewatch The Wicker Man.
Also, I'm not gonna talk about The Wicker Man without explaining to people the importance of the original, and that is because the newer one is, by my enemy, Neil LaBute, and if you're like, that feels really crazy to hate this random movie person who's not that successful. I am assuming that you do not come from a theater background and a theater community where Neil LaBute writes plays called Fat Pig that supposedly created a great role for a fat actress. But then in the end, spoiler alert, her love interest leaves her because he's too embarrassed to be with a fat girl. And he also wrote one called Reasons to Be Pretty, which is about how women are too neurotic because they're too obsessed with beauty, and that's why they let bad men be bad to them. It's super victim blaming and terrible. So I won't even watch the new one because that is by my enemy.
Yes. Yeah,
So
we
original
also
only.
yeah, also just Christopher Lee is a delight to
Hmm.
watch. As are everybody actually in the movie, I think. Like I do feel like the main character of um The Wicker Man, like that actor, I think he feels like he's in a different movie, but that adds to it. So I love it so much. Another movie-based one we do is we get together on the 4th of July because fuck America, truly. And we watch Jaws and root for the shark.
We root for the shark, but we also root for a threesome on the boat. And then when that doesn't
Yes.
happen, we're like, let the shark win. And to be clear, we watch this movie every year. We know there will be no threesome, and we know there will be um arguably no shark winning. But we
Yeah,
still we want what we want. We're simple men.
we are. We're simple fellas. Um and yeah, like I said, a lot of our other like joint celebrations are, we celebrate each other's birthdays. That's very important for us. We celebrate like we do seasonal stuff together, whether or not it's actually like Wheel of the Year seasonal or just seasonal. Um, every once in a while we'll be like, "Do you feel like doing something about this?" And then we do something about it.
Absolutely. I will say the big bad in real life is the same big bad in TTRPGs, which is scheduling. So we do our best.
Yeah,
Um, but and
for sure.
especially because we are on some of the same witchcraft paths, but also some very different ones. Um, that also shapes like, well, I already did the thing and I don't actually want to like contradict that or whatever. So it's always a balance. And I think you have to kind of find your groove, which is, I think if I was giving homework to listeners of this podcast or readers of this transcript, I would say to start by picking any day that is coming up to work it as a Sabbath, whether that is a traditional Wheel of the Year day, whether it is like, oh, I'll try the start of summer since I missed the start of spring. Anything like that is really good. I think um your own birthday, whatever. And so treating it like a Sabbath, because I don't feel we necessarily talked about that. It is just marking it as special in whatever way says that to you, but is also appropriate with the day itself. So if you are celebrating birthday as just like a celebration of all things you and exploring your own sort of divinity and connection to the divine, it's not going to make sense to do something that counters that. Or it might, it's up to you. You do you. But I think thinking more about, okay, if we're using the birthday example, like even just taking a day to do 3 of your favorite things that you don't get a chance to do very often is going to really help shape that. Let's say you choose Beltane or the start of a different fire sign. You're like, okay, I will literally just do a fire in my friend's backyard and make s'mores and maybe throw some herbs into the fire. Like, great, you did it. You celebrated a Sabbath. To me, it should be like one part devotion or gratitude and then one part something that feels really personal. Again, do try to separate that from capitalism, but none of us are perfect. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think that like another thing that you can do is say you don't do a tarot reading every day, right? Maybe you want to do a big tarot reading for yourself on that Sabbath. I know that a lot of people kind of use those special days as days of divination. Um, it can be as big or as small as you want it to be, really.
mhm.
It could be as simple as getting yourself a cupcake and singing a silly little song and blowing out a candle, or it can be as big as like a full blown ritual and ceremonial garb and like a huge tarot reading and all of that stuff. It's really, as much of this podcast is, it is a very choose your own adventure experience.
Mhm. Yeah. So thank you for listening to this episode. Before we go, let's talk about it. Siri, what chaos are you wreaking into the world this week?
Um, Good God. I'm not feeling particularly chaotic right now. Um, I think, wow, yeah, I don't actually have one.
That's okay. I think sometimes it's good to take a week off from chaos. I think whether we are speaking magically or not. And the reason I say that magically, and we're going to get into this next season, but the reason that I think it's good to take a week or a month or whatever off is because chaos magic is very specifically results oriented, as are a lot of series like traditional and ancestral practices. They're very results oriented. So that means once you set an intention, like maybe don't do stuff in that sandbox for a while. So I think that's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. What about you?
Here is what I will say. Here's what I'll talk about. Okay. So I recently got and this is a good like promotion for someone we've interviewed also. I got a lithomantic reading from Thumper shortly after we interviewed them, specifically about some really weird shit that went down in, if you don't know or missed this in previous episodes, me and my former theater business partner have started a new production company specifically for TTRPG centric work and actual plays. So but we were doing live shows. So that's really fun and exciting. Like we were doing them for an audience, which means we had to fully stack it with people who not only knew game well, but also were really good improvisers and could kill time while people are, like, shuffling and rolling dice and stuff like that in a way that was entertaining. But a bunch of really, really weird things happened, and it felt like confirmation that we were on the right track, but in a very bizarre way, and so I wanted to just make sure that I was not being too hopeful and I was not misreading these signs. So I got a lithomancy reading, which is a reading with stones and with sort of the chaos star and mat that Thumper uses. And it was so affirming and so beautiful, but I also sort of file it away as chaos, not only because it was the chaos mat and not only because lithomancy is a little bit more well known in chaos magic circles, but because it was specifically like a new thing that I do incorporate magic into, which is the TTRPG. And it did a lot of the really weird stuff did have a lot to do with new media. And then also having a chaos witch like cut through all of that for me was so, so helpful. So that was my chaos this week. It was letting someone else do it for me and getting a reading from someone else.
Hell yeah. We love to see it.
Yeah.
What about your cunning?
I mean, it's spring, right? It's all garden all the time right now. I will say that yesterday and today have been very big. I've been very focused on like basically preparing my house plants for me to neglect them a smidge in the coming weeks so that I can focus on the outdoor garden. So cutting off leaves, etc. But then the cunning work piece of that is sort of figuring out if any of them should be whether to compost them or dry them, essentially like figuring out like, oh, does this just go to make soil richer or do I use this in future spells? So that's really the cunning right now. What about you?
So, this is kind of in the dual faith part of cunning work. Like a lot of cunning workers, were dual faith in a lot of ways and did work not just with, pagan gods, but also with other deities of more mainstream traditions. Um, that is all to say, like, I have a weird affinity for working with Mary, that I never expected and I never would have followed. I don't think if Kellyanne Maddox hadn't been very upfront and forward about her Marian practice,
Mhm.
which is very fantastic because she's also not like anti devil work um and stuff too, which I think is very important. Um but yeah, I've just been really like feeling her presence a lot lately. Um whether that's praying a novena or like learning more about an obscure and strange like visitation story or something like that. I've just been feeling her presence lately, which is really nice. Um it's one of those that like I wasn't going to work with Mary at all, but then I noticed that every time something weird or bad, like when there was like a big weird bad thing happening, like a new rosary would come into my life.
That is so wild. Like I also would have probably followed that thread and I'm pretty anti working with like Christian stuff.
Yeah, like I always thought that, like if I had to work with one of the big uh like Abrahamic traditions, it would have been Judaism actually, but
Uh-huh.
also like Mary is fascinating. And I had kind of a role model witch that I was looking at that was like able to balance working with Mary with working with other kinds of deities. And I also work with Hell too, and Kelly and Maddox also works with Hell. And so it felt very like, okay, like this isn't um this isn't as far removed as um it seems. The other thing too is that I don't have the religious trauma that a lot of pagans have around Christianity. Um, I grew up I like to call them like one step away from Unitarian Christian church.
Uh-huh.
So it's just like very like, oh, these are the actual teachings of Jesus. Isn't socialism great? Love that.
Yeah.
So like that's the context that I'm coming at this with. I'm definitely not suggesting that anybody with religious trauma should try to follow me in that way.
Right. No, but I love that for you and I love I don't know, to me I feel like this a lot of this podcast is about syncretism, and it's like I feel like to me there is a bit of chaos in that because it's very much like a much older line of faith with Mary specifically. Like, yes, it's as new as Christianity, but like, uh but sort of a much older line. But it's also like the original Christianity, right? So it's like
Yeah.
and so but it's also like bringing that into modern day, and also like the chaos magic principle of like working with different paradigms and different pantheons at different times. So I think, but that also means getting to know those pantheons and those paradigms with enough intimacy to know when to sort of pick them up and lay them down.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that it's just been really interesting. I think there's a lot of like um there's just so much about it that I don't really have time to get into now because this episode is already pretty long. We're like, as our season progressed, our episodes got like longer and longer.
I
Speaking of the very end, we will see you next season. We don't have a release date for that yet. But we will be talking about chaos magic in much more detail, talking much in greater detail about magical theory, which I'm very excited about. And if you want to support us in the meantime, you can check out our Patreon. If you need transcripts as well, or if you want to reference something and want to look at the transcript, we do have all transcripts of the podcast on our Patreon for free. Um, so you can just
that
go
being
there
said,
and read them.
that being said, if you could support us, that would be amazing. Right now, Siri is paying out of pocket for Riverside because I have no money, which I feel really bad about. So our first goal is to essentially pay them back for the months that I was not able to contribute that we were doing this, as well as future months. And then I think we also put so much time and love into this, and we want to be able to keep doing it. And like, let's be real, a carton of eggs costs $1 million. Like, in order to continue to devote time to this, we need to do it. Or we need help. So that's sort of my end of the season plea. But the other thing that I will say is that you can support us in other ways. Buying any of our books is super, super helpful. Telling your friends to buy our books is super, super helpful. Anything by Cassandra Snow, Siri Vincent Pluff, or bonus case and Lessons from the Empress or Tarot, in other words, both of us. So that is really helpful. We are also both open for a number of types of sessions. I'm open for tarot and oracle readings. I'm also open for any kind of one-on-one, like lesson, pick your brain consultation that you think I would be good at. And if I don't agree, I will tell you that. But that encompasses like anything sort of connected to writing, especially nonfiction writing, things like book proposals, stuff like that, as well as pretty much anything witchcraft and tarot related. And then, of course, what I want to talk about the most is how that intersects with queer identity and values for you, as well as creative stuff, as well as I think me and Siri both really love getting into the nitty gritty of like witchcraft and what it means to you. So those are some of the like sessions you can get if you find my website, which is cassandra-snow.com.
I also am releasing season 3 of the Heathen's Journey podcast. So if you want me to continue to be in your ears and you are interested in heathenry, then you should go and listen to that. I don't have a release date as of recording, but it will be very shortly after this podcast airs. So please listen to me there. Yeah.
I will
All right, y'all. Well, we'll see you next season. Pay attention to our socials and our Patreon for exact release dates and stuff like that. But we will see you on the other side.